I remember every millimeter of the road as my car plunged into the ditch, staging my own death. I was dead. My family was mourning me, and my murderous nephew was about to collect $5 million. But he didn't know that the final signature he had to put down to get the money was signing his own arrest warrant. And I watched the whole thing unfold on TV from the Caribbean. I am Richard, a man who built a fortune and a career dissecting the darkest motives of human greed as a high-ranking financial fraud auditor. My wealth meant I was paranoid, but that paranoia, the kind that forces you to check your own medication, ended up saving my life. My nephew, Alex, was the sole beneficiary of my $5 million life insurance policy, a policy that was merely a test of character. A test he failed when I found my heart medication subtly but critically tampered with. If you enjoy calculated revenge stories about justice served cold, hit that subscribe button. I've got a vault of true stories about financial greed and ultimate comeuppance that you won't want to miss. My first thought wasn't fear, but a cold, professional rage. Calling the local police was out of the question. It would be messy, slow, and hard to prove attempted murder against a seemingly caring relative. No, I needed surgical precision. I needed to use my own expertise. I realized I had the tools to build the perfect trap, a devastating financial mechanism designed to ruin Alex completely, legally and publicly. He wanted my money, but he was going to get the one thing I valued more than money: absolute, surgical revenge. I immediately contacted my most trusted former colleague in Washington, initiating what I named the Richard Protocol. Alex thought he was waiting for me to die, but the truth was, he was walking directly into the most sophisticated audit of his life. The game had begun, and I was holding the deck. The revelation about Alex tampering with my medication didn't just hurt. It clarified my purpose. The police would have charged him with attempted murder, a serious charge, but one with too many variables: plea deals, sympathetic juries, maybe just a few years served. I wanted something absolute, something that would strip him of his future and his pride. I wanted his greed to be the weapon used against him. My revenge had to be a work of art, executed with the cold precision of a financial surgeon. I immediately reached out to Agent Sterling, a retired colleague from the FBI Financial Crimes Division, the only man I trusted with my secret. I couldn't just tell him Alex was trying to kill me. I told him I needed to audit a life insurance policy, my life insurance policy, for future fraud risk. I claimed I was worried about a sophisticated external scammer trying to leverage my policy after my death. Sterling, knowing my reputation, agreed immediately to set up the covert system. The core of the trap was turning the $5 million payout into an irreversible legal trigger. I spent the next 2 weeks establishing a special, hidden trust fund attached to the policy. Legally, Alex was still the sole beneficiary, but my former firm's proprietary software now flagged any claim against that specific policy for mandatory executive review. This executive review was an unofficial but binding protocol, a fully sanctioned criminal audit I had written the rules for years ago. The rules were simple. The final signature required to release the funds would automatically activate an investigation by a special joint task force led by Sterling. Alex, meanwhile, continued his sickening charade of being the dutiful nephew. He'd bring me my tea, smiling, asking if I needed anything, while subtly rearranging items in the garage, ensuring a dangerous environment for my next accident. He was so focused on my physical decline, he completely missed the complex legal machinery I was building to guarantee his spiritual and financial ruin. Every time he offered me his assistance, I just smiled back, knowing he was helping me finalize the paperwork for his own spectacular downfall. The wire was set. All I needed now was the bait. Alex grew impatient, and his impatience was the fuel for my fire. The subtle tampering with my pills wasn't working fast enough for him, so he escalated. This was the test the waters phase. Only he was the one being tested. I needed him to be overconfident, to believe he was an untouchable criminal genius, because that arrogance would make his eventual fall much harder. One Tuesday morning, he insisted on taking me out to lunch at a secluded lakeside restaurant. He parked near a steep, rocky embankment. As we walked back, he lagged behind. I could practically feel his intent, the surge of adrenaline and the calculation in his eyes. He quickly tripped, grabbing my arm with excessive force, supposedly to save himself, but in a way that pulled me sharply toward the drop. I saw the malicious glint in his eyes for a split second before I planted my feet, using the anti-gravity maneuvers I'd learned decades ago in executive protection training. I shifted my weight, turned his pull into a stumble for him, and caught him instead. I said, my voice calm, but my grip like steel on his wrist. The shock on his face when I saved him was priceless. It wasn't fear, it was frustration. He mumbled apologies, shaking off my hand, completely missing the fact that I was already steps ahead. This staged incident confirmed everything. He wasn't going to stop until I was gone. But more importantly, it confirmed his escalating recklessness. He thought I was frail, slow, and stupid. I needed him to feel that easy victory was right around the corner. Over the next few days, I deliberately acted weaker, occasionally stumbling when Alex was near, complaining of dizziness, and openly discussing how burdensome the $5 million policy was to maintain. I even left the folder containing the policy details, the exact policy that triggered the Richard Protocol, casually on my desk, knowing Alex would sneak into my study the moment I left the house. He took the bait, skimming the policy, his eyes glowing with 5 million reasons to finish the job quickly. He was now fully convinced that his plan was flawless and that I was on my last legs. The stage was set for the ultimate performance, my fake demise. After the almost fall incident, I knew Alex wouldn't wait long. I had perhaps a week before he tried something truly drastic. This gave me just enough time to execute the most complex audit of my life, auditing my own existence. The preparation for my disappearance had to be perfect, leaving behind a believable, mournful ghost, while ensuring the new Richard remained utterly untraceable. First, the financials. My real wealth, the kind that wasn't tied up in the obvious properties and accounts, was funneled through a series of offshore holding companies and encrypted digital wallets I had established years ago. I spent 2 nights liquidating the last of my traceable assets, turning them into layers of financial anonymity. Alex would inherit a nice house and some liquidated assets, but the real fortune, my true legacy, would follow me into my new life. Then came the digital footprint. I needed to solidify the image of a frail old man losing his faculties. I deliberately left half-written, rambling emails on my computer about my worsening memory. I researched remote, high-risk diving locations and left browser tabs open, suggesting a reckless, end-of-life impulse. This created a digital narrative that would align perfectly with a tragic, sudden disappearance. The most difficult part was saying goodbye. I called Agent Sterling one last time. It was a cold, professional conversation about closing a complex file. But the subtext was clear. He knew the risks I was taking, and he confirmed the Richard Protocol was armed and ready. He was the only person who knew the truth, and he was my only anchor to the old world. Hanging up that call felt like severing my last connection to Richard, the auditor. I stood in my expensive mahogany study, looking at my life, the trophies, the photos, the memories, and packed only what was essential: a small bag, several encrypted devices, and my new passport, bearing a new, unremarkable name. The next time anyone saw Richard, it would be as a tragic victim of circumstance. The play was ready to start. The day I chose for my theatrical departure was cold and rainy, perfect for obscuring crucial details. Alex was out for the morning, giving me a clean window of 4 hours to execute the riskiest part of the entire operation, the staged car accident. This had to be convincing enough to satisfy both the police and the insurance company, the two institutions that specialized in detecting fraud. I drove my luxury sedan to a secluded, rocky section of the coastal road, the exact spot I had researched online and left in my digital history. The key wasn't to destroy the car, but to create the convincing implication of a catastrophic loss. I placed my wallet, my identifying documents, and a few blood samples, ethically sourced from a local blood bank and treated to appear authentic to crash trauma, strategically near the driver's side. Crucially, I left my distinctive signet ring, a family heirloom Alex recognized, lodged deep beneath the smashed dashboard. The damage was done using carefully placed small explosive charges, designed by a former military contact, that crumpled the front end and deployed the airbag without causing an actual fatal impact. I made sure to leave the passenger door slightly ajar, suggesting I might have been ejected or fatally injured on impact. Then came the hardest part: leaving the scene. I was covered in dust and grease, but utterly unharmed. I quickly changed into the drab, waterproof clothing I'd stashed in the trunk, grabbed my small go bag, and hiked 4 miles through dense woodland to a prearranged pickup spot. My contact, a silent man who specialized in high-stakes logistics, was waiting with an unmarked vehicle. As we drove away, I saw the flashing blue and red lights converge on the scene from a distance. The police had found the wreck. It was a strange feeling, watching my old life, Richard, the wealthy auditor, burn brightly in the headlights of a dozen patrol cars. The local news reports later that evening used my own carefully planted digital footprint to speculate. Elderly man, possibly suffering from confusion, takes dangerous coastal drive. Presumed fatality. Alex, watching the same report at home, was undoubtedly already calculating his $5 million windfall. He saw a tragedy. I saw the successful end of Act 1. My new life began immediately on a small, anonymous island in the Caribbean, far from the reach of U.S. jurisdiction. But my focus remained laser-sharp on the mainland, specifically on Alex. Agent Sterling had set up a secure, encrypted feed for me, a live window into the chaos I had created. I watched the local news coverage of my presumed death, the police press conference confirming they had recovered items belonging to the missing Richard, and the tearful yet noticeably restrained statements from my grieving nephew. Alex's performance was pathetic. He tried to look distraught, but the avarice was practically radiating off the screen. I saw him wipe away a dry tear before adjusting his tie, clearly anticipating the next step. He mourned for a respectable 48 hours, the minimum social requirement, before making his move. The call came on Thursday morning, 2 days after the accident. I watched through the security cameras I had strategically left active in my study. Alex closed the door, pulled out the familiar $5 million policy folder, and dialed the number. His voice, usually whiny and demanding, was now smooth, almost sickeningly polite. He introduced himself as the sole beneficiary, speaking about his, quote, whose tragic accident had left him utterly devastated. He didn't ask if the policy would pay out. He asked when. He was so deeply entrenched in his fantasy of effortless wealth that he didn't notice the subtle red flags I had planted. For example, he never once mentioned the accident details, only the policy number. A grieving relative would ask about the investigation. A calculating criminal asks about the claim. He was rushing the process, eager to bypass the mandated waiting period for a presumed deceased case. The insurance agent on the other end, unaware of my Richard protocol, gave him the standard line about paperwork and bureaucracy. Alex's face darkened with impatience, his polite facade cracking to reveal the raw greed beneath. It was a beautiful sight. He was already drowning in his own hubris, happily paddling toward the legal undertow I had created just for him. His journey to the $5 million had officially begun. The next month was agonizing for Alex and pure entertainment for me. I had designed the insurance process to be agonizingly slow, a perfectly smooth but time-consuming bureaucratic machine. Alex was running a marathon, but I had lengthened the track just enough to make him burn out, making him desperate for the finish line. Every time Alex called the insurance company, he was met with the same polite, stonewalling response. I was all legitimate steps, but I had used my old contacts inside the insurance sector to ensure every single request was delayed by exactly 3 business days. 3 days doesn't raise suspicion, but over 30 days, it builds immense pressure. I watched him. The polished veneer he wore began to chip away. He started snapping at the insurance clerks, then apologizing profusely, then immediately snapping again. His fear wasn't about being caught. His fear was that the money, the $5 million he had risked everything for, would somehow slip away due to red tape. He became completely consumed by the process. He stopped bothering to maintain the house. He let his appearance slide, and he spent every waking hour either on the phone or staring at the stack of forms. This fixation was vital to my plan. By focusing all his energy on the bureaucratic hurdles, he completely forgot about the initial crime. He wasn't thinking about the tampered pills or the staged falls. He was only thinking about the money. His desperation made him careless. He began making aggressive moves, like hiring a pushy, low-rent lawyer to threaten the company with a lawsuit, which only served to make the insurance company clerks, briefed by my old associates, more meticulous and slower. He was digging his own hole, and I, from my sunny vantage point, simply provided him with the shovel. The final, crucial signature was drawing closer, and Alex was too frantic to notice the razor wire surrounding the finish line. After nearly 2 months of deliberate delays, the gears of the insurance machine finally began to turn smoothly, a deceptive quiet before the storm. I signaled Agent Sterling that it was time to move to the final phase. The complex paperwork had served its purpose, thoroughly exhausting Alex and convincing him that he had conquered every obstacle. The call he had been desperately waiting for came on a Friday afternoon. I watched his reaction on my hidden feed. His entire body tensed as the insurance claims manager, whom I had vetted and trusted to stick to the script, delivered the good news. Mr. Richards' policy claim has been approved. We are ready to issue the full $5 million payout. Alex didn't speak for a few seconds. He just released a breath he seemed to have been holding since my death. He stammered, his professionalism instantly abandoned for naked urgency. The manager explained very cordially that due to the size of the payout and the unique circumstances of the claim, the check had to be personally signed by an executive. Alex would need to come into the downtown corporate office on Monday morning for a brief signing ceremony and to collect the funds. This was the final, meticulous detail of the trap, forcing him to enter a specific, controlled location. The meeting room he was directed to was a secure site, known only to a few people, and it was the perfect place for an arrest. Alex spent the entire weekend in a state of euphoric delusion. He started shopping online for extravagant cars and penthouse apartments, mentally spending money he hadn't yet touched. He was already talking about quitting his miserable job and moving to Miami. He was so far gone in his fantasy that he completely failed to recognize the subtle anomaly. Why was a $5 million bank transfer requiring an in-person, ceremonial signature? But greed blinds the sharpest mind, and Alex's mind was anything but sharp. On Monday morning, he arrived at the massive glass tower, dressed in his finest suit, ready to claim his reward. He looked like a man walking into his triumph. I knew he was walking straight into his execution chamber. Monday morning. I was sitting comfortably on my rented veranda, overlooking the turquoise Caribbean, watching the drama unfold on my tablet screen. The live feed was crisp, showing the secure conference room in the financial building. Alex entered, radiating false confidence, shaking hands with the claims manager and an executive I recognized, both trusted former contacts. They were acting the parts of corporate dignitaries perfectly. The executive slid a document across the polished table. It was the, quote, 12. The $5 million check was laid conspicuously beside the paper, a physical manifestation of Alex's ruinous obsession. His hands trembled as he picked up the expensive pen. This was the exact moment I had spent 2 months planning for. The executive pointed to the signature line. Just a formality, Alex. Sign here, and the funds are yours. Alex didn't even read the fine print. He just saw the dollar sign. With a flourish that reeked of self-satisfaction, he scribbled his name. The moment the pen left the paper, that signature triggered the Richard Protocol. It was the formal activation of the high-level criminal audit and the simultaneous notification to Agent Sterling, who was waiting just down the hall. The executive looked Alex right in the eye, and his cordial smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold, professional disgust. He said, pulling the check away. Before Alex could process the words, the door burst open. Agent Sterling and 2 uniformed FBI agents stormed into the room. Sterling didn't even look at the executive. His eyes were fixed entirely on Alex. "Alexander P. Jennings," Sterling stated, his voice booming across the silent room. "You are under arrest for multiple counts of attempted murder and attempted felony insurance fraud. The evidence of tampering with Richard's medication and coordinating subsequent incidents has been compiled by a joint task force." Alex's face went white. He looked at the executive, then at the check, then back at Sterling, his mind desperately struggling to reconcile the $5 million with the handcuffs now clicking around his wrists. "Richard? Richard is dead," he choked out, his voice a frantic squeak. "No, Alex," Sterling said, delivering the line I had rehearsed with him. "Richard is very much alive. He's the one who set up this audit for you." I muted the feed and leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee. The image of Alex, utterly destroyed, being dragged away, having gained nothing but a prison sentence for his greed, was the sweetest thing I had ever witnessed. The trap was sprung. The long game was over. The image of Alex being escorted from the corporate tower, his face a mask of ruined greed, played in my mind for days. I didn't feel hatred or even anger anymore, just the deep, cold satisfaction of a job perfectly executed. I didn't need to physically harm him. His punishment was far worse, the public, legal destruction of his future, directly caused by the very avarice he tried to profit from. He risked everything for $5 million he never received, and instead received a federal attempted murder charge. That is poetic justice in its purest form. My revenge was complete. I had eliminated the parasitic threat to my life and secured my true wealth and freedom in the process. The authorities handled the cleanup. Alex's lawyer tried to argue entrapment, but Sterling was prepared. We had months of evidence: the tampered pills, Alex's overly eager claims attempts, and his complete disregard for my well-being, all documented meticulously. The final signature was simply the cherry on top, the legal nail in his coffin. Now, sitting here, watching the waves roll in, I am no longer Richard, the paranoid auditor. I am just a man, finally free. My new identity is established. My assets are secure, and the constant threat is gone. I spend my days reading, walking the beach, and planning my travels. The wealth I acquired is now truly mine to enjoy, unburdened by the fear of being targeted by desperate family members. I traded a life of suspicion for a life of serenity. But I have to ask you, the listener, if you had discovered that your closest relative was actively plotting to kill you for money, and you had the resources and connections to pull off a perfect legal sting operation, did I do the right thing? What would you have done in my place? Let me know in the comments below. If this story of calculated revenge and ultimate justice captivated you, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of my true stories of greed and comeuppance, and leave a comment letting me know your thoughts. The end. Thank you for listening.